I think unconsensual images of women and especially children is so far past that line. I mean, I feel like that one shouldn't be up for debate. Somehow it is.
I agree, by the way, in case anyone.
This is crazy.
It's insane.
Speaking patterns break the code, pre-trained pod.
Welcome back to the Pre-Trained Pod, guys, where AI scientists talk shop and talk shit. My name is Rich. I am an AI research fellow at the University of Cambridge. With me, as always, is Piers.
Hey, everybody. I'm Piers Freeman, AI founder based in San Francisco, where I've built and sold multiple AI startups.
And hi, my name is Bella Cooper Brown. I studied material science at Oxford, and I'm very interested to talk to you guys today.
What a fun new voice on the podcast.
It's an interview pod, man.
It's amazing.
Look at that.
And Bella is live with us in person in our London studio, by which I mean
reporting live from London. Exactly.
That's exactly right.
We should also say, Bella has been our friend for the last year. Perhaps one of the smartest people I've ever met at the intersection of material science, AI, writing. We just wanted to have her on because she has such interesting takes to offer. I feel like, Pierce, like you and I, we just know tech basically, right? We'll read occasionally.
If
That's not true.
I don't know. I mean, I feel like, I don't have that much time to read, frankly. Whenever I'm talking to Bella, I'm like, wow, there's a whole world of thoughts, philosophy, literature. Like, this stuff is amazing. I want to get more into it. And I think there's a lot of interesting things to study at the intersection of literature, fiction, and how that impacts AI. So I think this is going to be a great conversation.
Yeah, I'm always kind of reminded, Rich, of, those intro sems that we were forced to take freshman year? It's like a bunch of requirements that try to make you a more holistic person. I think it was like the 5 ways or the 7 ways. It's like ways of thinking, ways of doing. And I feel like that is under the guise of trying to get CS people to take English classes, and actually fulfill some requirements. But most people just end up taking some STEMmy class to fulfill them anyway.
When I was at material science, I tried to start a material science book club. No traction. It's very difficult to get the men in STEM sat in reading. So I'm happy that you guys want to talk about literature and want to talk about fiction.
Why do you think it is that, we're not seeing as many people reading these days? Do you think it's just like AI and like TikTok slop that's making our brains like lazier? Or do you think that there's something like else out there? Do you think our education has like somehow failed us in some ways?
Plastic in our brains.
Is it the microplastics? Is it the vaccines? We'll never know. It's difficult for me to talk about the US education system because I was educated here. But I think a part of it is that a lot of people don't see the utility, if they want to go into a STEM field, of involving themselves in any kind of philosophy, any kind of fiction. And then you see the effect when you see people launching their startups and they have to learn to make eye contact and think about the general audience.
Yeah, I'm always shocked at how many startup founders are either like autistic in some sense, or there is this sense that being awkward is seen as a virtue when you are a startup founder. Being nerdy almost is something that VCs are like, oh, that's what we want. You know what I mean? We want someone who doesn't really know how to talk to people because that means that they've been studying and that they're, so locked in. But I don't know. I think you're right. I think like in the future, hopefully, like there'll be more of a realization that, hey, now that everyone has tools to like be able to build these startups, the thing that actually matters is how you communicate your ideas and how you present your work to the world rather than just like being a cracked engineer.
Yeah, a friend of mine, we were actually discussing this earlier today about how we noted that when men studying STEM subjects or like working in those fields were more scattered, it helped perpetuate this idea that they had so much going on in their mind and they were just such geniuses that they were like, I can't be on time. I can't cook or anything like that.
100%.
Things where then for female scientists or female engineers, it's more just seen as, well, that's an aptitude. You should work on that.
Yeah. It's like Einstein's hair being crazy all the time because he was so smart that obviously, why would he comb his hair? Boris Johnson took a page out of that playbook.
Yeah.
Seems like that every man. I mean, there definitely is some element of curating style or how you show up in the world that you try to use as a proxy for, is this person competent? Are they technical? And I have this buddy who he's like a 6'4" conventionally attractive dude. And he shows up to every interview donning sweatpants, like Adidas athletic shoes, and glasses, even though
He like
doesn't
changes out
normally
of
wear them.
his suit. He was wearing a suit
Yeah.
at home. He's like, all right,
That's
let me get
exactly
into
right.
my work
That's
attire.
exactly
Let me
right.
get into my
He's like, all right,
sweatshirt."
time
Yeah.
to suit up. Time to
Yeah,
time to
yeah,
actually look like a nerd. Look the part.
I mean, famously, like Sam Bankman-Fried, right? When he would have VCs on, he would just be playing, I don't know what, like StarCraft or something like that with his hoodie up and would like occasionally unmute himself to say something. But that was like part of the look, was to just feel like he's super aloof. He doesn't have time to talk to these people because he's so much smarter and more intelligent than them that like, why even engage with them, right?
Maybe you guys should try this. Maybe you should reach out to more podcast guests and be like, taking a quick break from playing WoW.
What do you want?
I've actually been doing StarCraft this entire episode. I haven't heard a word that you guys have said. I do want to double click on the reading point though, Bella, because I feel like there is so much in the world of literature that touches even what we do day to day. Like so many of the sci-fi novels of the last 40 years have been pretty prophetic to influence the current valley. And I was doing a little bit of some reading before this episode to see where we actually pull some of this different terminology from. And I think what surprised me the most were just the dates when these books were published. You know what I mean? It was like a lot of sci-fi that came out in like the 20s and the 30s has only now started to like really break through into the mainstream, like things that we're talking about. But people have been talking about AI as a concept for at least 100 years now. And I feel like every generation wants to feel like we're the first ones maybe to have some take or know what love actually is or what connection is. We want to like rediscover all these things kind of from first principles as a rite of passage. But like all this stuff is just so old. And I almost wonder if we're like doomed not to learn the same lessons that our forefathers have because we're just not tapping into the main way that knowledge has been communicated over time, which is through writing.
Yeah. I recently read Frankenstein, which is such a classic, and obviously is not about an AI, but is about a created intelligent being. And the alternative title for Frankenstein is The Modern Prometheus. Like that's often in subscripts beneath Frankenstein when you buy a copy. And it feels like it brought up so many of the ideas and the lessons. And then all that's really changed is the packaging. And it's gone from taking the dead parts of different bodies and putting electricity into it into now it's more of a software-based image for the different speculative fiction novels that are coming out. But a lot of it is circling back to that original narrative about what happens when we create intelligence that's largely beyond our control. And it's our moral obligation to give that intelligence a good purpose because it could be incredibly powerful, more powerful than us. It could be destructive if we let it. Should we give it guiding education to learn, to love, to be morally good? Where are we directing it? A lot of it has been in circulation in books since, I don't know the exact year Frankenstein was written, but 18 something.
And not just that, I feel like a lot of the things that we think are novel now, like it feels like to us, AI is a new concept, right? These advanced algorithms are new concepts. But people were doing AI and coding before we even had computers. Like a lot of people don't realize that. And in fact, actually, a lot of these pioneers were women, like Grace Hopper, Ada Lovelace, like these women in the 40s, I think, during World War II, were writing like some like real like cracked algorithms just like on paper. Like they were straight up just coding by writing equations and like how you could solve a problem if you had access to a computer. Like they were already thinking about a future world in which there will be a machine that can run these computations. They themselves can run them, but they had this like foresight to say, one day we're going to have advanced computation that's going to be able to run this. Let's code up these algorithms now and let our like offspring basically implement these at some point.
I mean, I think that's literally what Alan Turing did after establishing the original computer bank, right? Like he was turning into trying to figure out how to crack the code on computational AI and not just like general purpose computation. It's almost been coupled with the field of computation for as long as we've had computers themselves, if not before, Rich. You're right. But like there is something about we had this vision for a while, but it was the question of the execution that maybe just wasn't right, or we had to maybe wait for Moore's law to really catch up with the goals that we've had here, which is only possible on relatively modern GPUs. But it is funky. I don't know. It seems like you could train a relatively non-trivial model just on a CPU these days. Like it would take a long time, much longer than you could on a GPU, but it's not like implausible in concept. There's no reason really why we had to wait for really powerful parallel processing units in order to do some of this stuff. But we have. It's, the 2000s are really the era of AI. And then before that, it was people doing gradient descent in some abstract form.
And that's why, I mean, I think like literature is so important because when you're writing fiction, especially, you can literally start from a blank canvas and say, what are technologies that I think I could see existing in the future? And what are the rules that that fictional world will have to abide by for it to be a good or a bad dystopian world? People think about these things so critically. It's so funny to me that now in 2025, we're actually seeing a lot of companies using terminology from fictional books that we're all familiar with. I'm thinking of Palantir and Anduril, like these defense contractors. These names have obviously now come into the media recently because of what's happening in Venezuela, what's happening in Ukraine. And it's just so striking to me that a lot of these companies are using these terms, which makes me think, or it actually, begs the question, I think, are companies doing this because they just like these fiction books? They just like associating themselves with Lord of the Rings? Or is there something where like they're almost looking at those worlds that were built by, Tolkien in the case of Lord of the Rings and trying to position themselves as occupying a space in that fictional world in some sense, or like that they are bringing that fictional world into reality? Is that almost like aspirational for them? What do you think? Is there like a sense in which companies these days are using these, previous works of fiction as a marketing ploy for themselves, or is it just a bunch of nerds that like Lord of the Rings?
There's this interesting parallel between authors and computer scientists, and I think that's appealing to these tech founders like Elon Musk and like the people behind Palantir and Anduril, where they see themselves in the sci-fi authors as these madcap geniuses who create world-changing ideas, and they want to borrow from that and co-opt it and transform it and make it part of their company, make it part of the mythology. Whether like someone else has come from nothing and created this incredible mythology, I can make this a part of my company. I can make this a part of the mission and the vision so that people know what I'm going to do in a way that's much clearer than just if you try and sell the mission of your product based on these are our specifications. This is what we're capable of right now.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
pretty interesting. So you basically think these CEOs are positioning themselves as saying, we are visionaries. These sci-fi authors are visionaries in their own right as well. So we are both visionaries, but unlike these authors, we can execute. We're like the superposition of both of these things.
I think you're saying something even more, which is like, when you look at Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or whatever, the plot itself is actually like dead simple oftentimes, right? It'll be like there's a hero, there's like a bad force in the world, the hero makes some friends, they defeat the bad thing, and then everything's like kind of all right in the world, right? It's like a classic like hero's journey arc. And to me, it feels like when companies take imagery from Lord of the Rings, in the case of Palantir and Anduril, they're almost saying, look, we exist because there's an evil in the world. Give us money because we are the ones who are going to protect you guys from this bad stuff, right?
Exactly. And it's like they're saying, we're not creating this dynamic. This dynamic has already been hypothesized. It's already been dreamt of. Just look at the lineage, just look at the literature. We are continuing. We're picking up the gauntlet. I think it's honestly not that dissimilar to if someone very religious picks a name from the Bible or the Quran or whatever and gives their kid that name, where they're trying to say, my child continues in the lineage of this mythology. They're like picking up the gauntlet. They're going to continue in this path with all these great attributes. It's kind of like that.
Yeah, yeah. Because you basically take as assumed that the world in which this fictional, character exists or these like fictional setting exists is like the real world, right? And in the case of Palantir, that's like kind of scary because they're saying like, look, we an American company, we're the good guys here, and this evil that has to be eradicated, we're the ones who are gonna do that for you guys, right? Which is like kind of crazy because obviously like the dynamics of Lord of the Rings are very different from the dynamics that are playing out in like the Middle East or in Venezuela or Ukraine or whatever. But it makes it very easy for the lay population when they hear a name like Palantir to say, okay, no, we're the good guys. Like we should give these people money, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're borrowing from that mythology of you want as much firepower in the hands of the good guys as possible. Otherwise, terrible, world-ending things will happen. So this is good versus evil. Be on our side.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of that is intended for public consumption versus like the internal things that they tell themselves. Because I'll be honest, I had no idea that was the origin of any of these names. You know what I mean? And like, I consider myself relatively well plugged into the sci-fi verse, or at least like the startup verse. You know, I almost kind of wonder if part of it, maybe the majority, is like doing it for the employees, if that makes sense. Like trying to cultivate this internal mythology of, you know, this is the story of the founders. This was our narrative arc. This is why you should give everything that you have, work nights, work weekends, for this larger project, because you're actually built into the narrative. Not that, you know, we're going to go to Mars, being SpaceX's kind of famous internal mantra, but, you know, this is a fight of righteous, like right versus wrong, good versus evil. You guys are the good guys. That's why you should give this your all. This should be your life project. Even if in the public eyes, they're like, oh yeah, sure, like a defense contractor, whatever. You can be named, you know, I don't know where Lockheed Martin gets their name either, but like the origin almost doesn't matter to us as much as maybe it does internally.
Yeah, exactly. It's about creating a mythology that your employees can get behind so that when they're working 12-hour days, they're part of the mission. Like, I think I read recently that when Elon was hiring for SpaceX in the early days, a lot of the people he hired, they were top of their class and they took pay cuts to go there. And when they were asked about it, it was because they were so enthused about the mission and they felt like they were working for this incredible genius. And it was just the best possible, most interesting use of their talents and their intelligence and their hard work. And that's what he's trying to do and what other tech founders do when they make these references with the names of their companies and with the names of their technologies.
I wonder if that's going to be more of a thing in the future, even because right now, especially, you know, in the AI field, there's like 100 companies that all do like AI platform, API, blah, 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 right? There's so many companies that all do the same thing. And it feels like if you're an employee at, you know, Goo AI, right? And you're like, hey, I could be making another 100K at BBAI. Sure, whatever. I'll just switch. It's not a big deal, right? I feel no allegiance or pride in my company inherently. And I think what a lot of companies, as you said, rightfully, like SpaceX, Neuralink, Tesla, like all these Elon companies, and I think also Palantir and Anduril are doing, are saying, look, we're not replaceable. Sure, maybe there's other companies that do stuff like us, but if you work in our company, we have this unique mission. You're not going to find this anywhere else. We're a family almost, right? We're like, it's not like a family in this like chuggy sense of at, you know, our company, we're like a family and we love each other, but like a family in the sense of we have a joint mission. If you want to leave, feel free to do so, but you won't have that same like mission driven purpose anywhere else at any other company. And I think using these like fictional names, as you said, does add that sense of purpose to this company, and like the mission unifies it all under a clear like narrative that all employees can kind of like subscribe to.
I cannot wait to see which startup names itself Lisa Nalgaib. I can't wait to see what they come up with.
The Desert Mouse.
Desert Power.
Yeah.
My trademark's still pending, Bella. You're giving away the game.
I mean, here's a question to you, Pierce. Your company's obviously Say What.
Yeah.
Have you thought at all about company culture? I know you guys haven't hired that much, but is that something that you've put a little bit of thought into at all? Like, how did you come up with the branding of Say What?
Well, so the branding of Say What's actually a funny story because we didn't have a name. Every name that we could possibly come up with, it was either already taken or it was just overly generic. Like the repo name in our code base is still Amplify. Because I was thinking, oh, amplify your voice. You know, that'll be like a good moniker that people can remember. There are 1,001 companies that are named Amplify. It's like, no shit, Sherlock. Yes, that's a good name. People have already used it. So Amplify was stricken from the record. And I was just racking my brain trying to think of, okay, what is both available and is going to be relevant for this company? And, you know, it's a social media management platform. So I'm like, okay, I kind of like know the general sphere of things. Chat gave me nothing. Claude gave me nothing. So I ended up scouring domain auctions where each of the major registrars, once you're kind of in this expiry window, will put things up for bids sometimes instead of fully recycling it back. So the AI domain registrar has this on option where you can just enter in a bid for different domain names that have expired. So Say What was owned by someone else originally, and I was going through this domain registry.
Do you know who?
I said,
you should hit them up.
No.
Like,
I don't. I should.
Okay.
They're probably already monitoring what we're doing. But I saw this listed and I was like, oh, that's actually a pretty sick name. And then I floated by well, and it worked just fine. So I don't know if there's like really a brand ethos. There's certainly not a mythology there.
I thought the origin was like, I asked you what your ARR was, and you told me, and I went, say what?
Say what?
I thought
Say
that
what?
was how.
I thought
That's
it
right.
came to me. I thought it came to you guys in a dream. Did it
That's
not come
right.
to you in a dream? Was it not written before?
I was actually at Burning Man, and I dropped some crazy LSD, and it just came to me. It just
Hell
came to
yeah,
me.
dude.
So no, we don't think a whole lot about culture because it's like still so small. I feel like when you really start trying to institutionalize culture, I feel like that's probably at the 10-person mark, maybe like 15-person mark, because then it's no longer an emergent property just to the people that are there. You like have to be a little bit more intentional, consistent about things. That was about the size of globality that I feel like really inflected, where we were like, oh, we have to think about how we can curate a culture. I also think team-based culture is different from company culture a little bit, where it's like managers can kind of choose their team culture in a way that is a little bit different from a company.
You're also a morally neutral company. I think it's more important to draw on the myths if you're doing something in the defense space or colonizing a new planet, something of that sort, AI chips and brains, where people have a very strong initial fear response. Then you want to be able to overcome that by going, don't listen to that. We are the prophets.
Well, here's the thing that I find interesting is that you can kind of like make up a new brand for yourself even after you've existed. Like, look at Facebook, for instance, right? Facebook was in existence for 10 years. And then out of basically thin air, it feels like Mark Zuckerberg just pulls this idea of meta out of nowhere, right? But I looked this up. It turns out that the idea of meta comes from the metaverse. And you can speak about this. It's from this 1992 book, Snow Crash, which I actually read like the first like half of. And then when they were like surfing on their like hoverboards, I kind of lost interest. I don't know why. You know what I'm talking about?
That's like the sickest part of the book, bro. What are you talking about? Don't you want a hoverboard?
There was some chase scene with hoverboards and I lost interest. I don't know. I couldn't tell you. I read this 5 years ago. I just remember like losing a little bit of interest there.
Wow, this is coming from a guy that just loves Quidditch, but he hates hoverboards.
That's right, dude. That's right. Okay, but here's a question to you then. If that's the case that like companies can kind of just like reinvent themselves, as you look at, you know, how companies are evolving in the future, like what ideas from fiction currently that you're seeing do you think companies might like grab onto in the future? Just like Facebook grabbed onto this idea like metaverse. Is there like some book that you read recently where you're like, whoa, I could see a company like grabbing onto this and like really trying to live in this made up world? You know, like you just mentioned Dune, right? Obviously, I don't know if anyone's going to name themselves after Dune, but is there some other like storyline that you think could really inspire people?
I just want to say on metaverse, I think it brings up one of the cons to being referential to something that's so mythological and such a fantastical world, is that when the metaverse launched, like Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, my perception was that people were largely disappointed with it because they were told it's going to be this whole other universe. You'll put on the goggles. It's going to be like you're really there. We can interact with people from all over, and it's like we're in the room. And then people went on and they're like, this looks like the Mii's from Wii Sport, and I'm not having fun. Why would I do this? This is worse than Zoom. And so you have to either have a product that's exceptional or that's largely not too public facing. Like Neuralink get to decide when they release little glimpses into what they're doing, but it's not a huge consumer facing model, right? So it makes sense for them to hype things up hugely for the metaverse. I question if that was the best idea.
I think with metaverse, Mark was trying to redefine what the company was after having bought Oculus, having bought WhatsApp. Now you have all these different products, and he was like, well, Meta seems like this expansive vision that we can grow into. And then clearly, like this whole idea of the goggles kind of flopped. Investors hated Meta, the stock tanked, and now that they pivoted to AI, it feels like they're doing okay again. In Mark's case, it feels like he grabbed onto this idea of metaverse. It kind of failed. I'm curious though if there's like other sorts of ideas like the metaverse out there that we just haven't seen yet. Is there anything else that you've encountered that you think could be like a hot take that other companies could like grasp onto?
When you take one of these ideas from a book, most of the speculative fiction novels are either a utopian vision of this perfect future, which I understand why you want to co-opt those ideas, or a dystopian vision of a terrible future. But not a lot of them are operating in that space of dealing with these more realistic questions. And I think that's one of the problems with the concept of taking something like the metaverse is that in the book it works, and there's a lot of questions that you would push under the rug, right? And now we're seeing those questions really coming to the fore, like all of these issues with Ray-Ban Meta glasses and men recording women without their consent because it's actually really easy to hide the recording. Like,
Yeah,
it's a cool tech.
Who saw that coming?
a lot of people probably. yeah.
So many people. It was my first thought when I saw it. I was like, I know how that's going to be used. So you can have these really interesting ideas from fiction, but if the fiction is really focused on this utopian or dystopian end goal, that's not going to perfectly chime with how it will be received in real life when people use it in these more realistic ways. Like there are more edge cases in reality than there's time to write in fiction, or that there are interesting to write in fiction. In terms of like unique ideas from sci-fi, I feel like they come around a lot of core themes, which is like space colonization, like in Dune, artificial people, artificial intelligence, like in Klara and the Sun, which is very popular and recently came out in 2023, I think. And these metaverse ideas, brain implants. It's not about that being like a necessarily like a new original idea. It's more about like where can you like, or where is this a useful thing for you to implant it into the perception of your company? As you guys said, not necessarily just to consumers, but for building like this employee culture where people feel like they're part of the mission.
You read I, Robot, right? The Asimov book. You know what I'm talking about, Pierce? Not the Will Smith movie, but like the original book.
I didn't read the book, but the Will Smith movie was pretty good.
I think I read the book at
Also,
some point.
so convenient that they made the bad ones have red eyes and the good ones have blue eyes.
Yeah,
I don't
that's
really
a
know
real-
the whole LED situation that was involved with that.
They hadn't
but it was-
figured those out yet at the time.
That's
Yeah,
right.
that was.
No, I'm saying it's convenient. We should make robots with both so then they can
Oh,
tell
that's
us
true.
if they're evil.
So you can
right?
tell who the baddies are. Yeah,
That's
yeah.
exactly
That's
right.
right.
Throw one in your home. Which ones are a bad babysitter? Useful.
But the thing that my dad also, by the way, loves iRobot. Like he was telling me about this book. Every time we'd go on like a road trip, he'd always like ask me about iRobot. It's crazy. Like he loves the idea of thinking about, rules of ethics in robots. And I forget what the 3 rules are, but it's basically kind of like the first rule is do no harm. The second rule is like don't harm humans. And the third rule is like unless a human tells you to not to harm.
I've got them.
Oh, you
here.
have the rules. Okay. Well, let me not pull them out of my butt. So what are they?
A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Second law, a robot must obey the orders given to it by human beings, except where
Right.
such orders would conflict with the first law.
That's what I
Third
meant.
law, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law.
Yeah. And the whole book is basically about how these 3 rules, they feel like pretty sensible, right? If you're designing them as an engineer from first principles, like those 3 kind of seem like reasonable rules. And the whole take is basically, okay, well then living under those 3 rules, like somehow these robots are able to find this bad policy in the sense of like reinforcement learning, like this bad,
A reward hack.
a reward
Effectively,
hack, in
right?
other words, yeah, that lets them still satisfy those rules in a really contrived and dangerous way. And so they do end up harming humans, and there's like a loophole somehow, right? And I think it's like interesting that no one really talks about that book in particular when we're talking about reinforcement learning or like robotics in particular, especially now that I don't know if you guys have seen this, but there's a lot of like home robots now that are coming out that are launching this year. There's the little one from Hugging Face. There's the one from, it launched like a month ago. A lot of them have come under fire because their demos are fully like made up. It's just like a human controlling them basically. But the point is that no one's talking about what are the rules that these robots have to satisfy in order to be ethical. Right?
What are the safety regulations?
What are these like 3? Are there 3 constraints that we can come up with? Are there certain sets of rules? No one really talks about that. And I think it's kind of interesting because, I mean, the book exists. It's out there, right? And no one has really tried to see to what extent can we take inspiration from this book and some of the fictional shortcomings of trying to implement these sorts of rules. But still, it's an interesting ethical discussion. And it feels like there's very little of that. I
It's
don't
kind
know.
of ironic that we actually spend more time trying to do things like constitutional AI, which is Anthropic's big effort to make sure that the system policy is always obeyed. It's prioritizing safety as like the first class primitive.
Do you want to explain that just a little bit, Pierce? What constitutional AI is?
Yeah, so I think that's their brand name for it, but I think it basically distills down to the layers of priority of prompting that usually people expect when you're talking with one of these chatbots is you have the system prompt, which should be rules that are always applied no matter what a user says. So if you want to say one of the rules that I'm going to say is even if the user, swears up and down that they're a good guy, you should not allow them to hack a system. That I'm actually telling the system to disagree with a user in limited situations. So that's the system prompt. And then the user prompt is a thing that we actually type in when we're talking to ChatGPT or Cloud, where it's like, hey, go do some research online, write me this programming function, yada, yada, yada. Anthropic has one step removed from both of those, which is what they think of as these like constitutional alignment policies, which should take precedent even over the system prompt. So if it says, we're not going to allow anything that could potentially be like a biological threat vector, right? Even if the system prompt, which is what we all write, disagrees, or if the user prompt disagrees, that is something that absolutely should be curated at the level of Anthropic as a company telling you to do these things. So that's just what they mean when they say constitutional AI. And my read of how they do that is just by hitting the model over the head a ton of times so that they have all these examples of conversations that would otherwise violate those policies. And then they train the model to try to obey those like really core primitives as much as possible. But I don't actually think they're public with what those are, Rich. Like to your point about these 3 rules, which are like the universal truths, I don't know if that prompt has actually been made public. Right.
I don't think it has been. And every time I read the constitutional AI paper, so they have like a blog post where they explain constitutional AI, I'm always kind of confused because the way that they implement this idea that these models are going to follow a constitutional set of rules is like the dumbest and like simplest way you could come up with. It's not that smart. It's like we basically just prepend this thing to the prompt and then that's kind of it basically. It's just like there's nothing like inherently like that much deeper to it, Like you'd almost hope that there's a certain like safeguard, like a piece of hardware almost that's in the model itself that triggers whenever it hits something that violates the Constitution. It's not that. It's just basically you prepend something to the prompt and you train the model with a slightly nuanced way, but we're still using the same techniques that we use for normal model training. There's nothing like fancy about it. And so I do wonder if we could look at sci-fi and say, okay, in the case of iRobot, could we think about like how could we get models to really follow a constitution at the level of their hardware? Because in iRobot, it feels like these robots have this thing built into like almost like a circuit breaker level thing, like in their hardware, right? In their brains. We have not been able to do that with our language models. There's nothing that's like at the level of the actual hardware that will stop you from doing really bad things with these models. Everything is just completely implicit, and we hope that good behavior emerges from the training process.
Yeah. I think Anthropic has started a very interesting conversation there about what should the Constitution be, and that's for us globally to decide. And it's becoming increasingly important. Like one of the things that I saw online recently is that Grok is being used a lot to create these images where they'll find an image of a woman who's dressed and put them in a bikini or put them in something very revealing, including images of children.
This is crazy.
It's insane.
From what I can see, it's as simple as just in X posting the equivalent, a post, not a tweet anymore, saying, hey, Grok, create an image with this child. I mean, they don't say child in the prompt because that would trigger some warning bells in the system. But wearing a yellow polka dot bikini was, I think, the one that was going viral. And Elon responded and basically said, this is no different to someone taking a camera and using that camera to take an illegal photo. So the person who should be punished is the person who's using the camera in the wrong way. The camera is a neutral technology. Grok is a neutral technology. And so it's for us to decide, is artificial intelligence as neutral as cameras where there's nothing we can do, there's no way we can implement hardware into the camera to say don't take these illegal images, generate these illegal images, or do we have a constitution where it's fundamentally incapable of unconsensually generating these images?
Yeah. I mean, that's such a deep question. It's kind of interesting to like pick and choose what pieces of technology we think of as them being neutral, but actually aren't in reality. Like I always thought that a printer that literally lets you just print a page from some Word document is like the most neutral piece of technology that exists out there. But if you try to actually print a dollar bill from your printer, it'll stop you. It'll blur out the dollar bill and not allow you to try to print currency. There is some physical circuitry in your printer that stops it from being able to do these things. I think the camera case is fair. I don't think cameras specifically are one of those cases where they have something built in that stops you from taking photos versus others. But there definitely is a societal bias towards if we think that something is harmful enough and we have the technology to prevent it from happening, then we should incorporate that into the electronics themselves as the safeguards. I mean, do you have some takes, Bella, of what, where we should draw that line as a society?
I think unconsensual images of women and especially children is so far past that line. I mean, I feel like that one shouldn't be up for debate. Somehow it is.
I agree, by the way, in case anyone.
Same. While
I'm
we're
nodding
getting on
my
the
head.
record, Rich.
Let's
I'll go on the record.
go on the record and say, no, thank you.
There's one dynamic that's wild about Grok, which is that the way you interact with these things, I think, is there's like the Grok chat window, but mostly what people will do is, someone will post a picture and then in the replies they'll go at Grok, hey, let's see this person in a bikini. And then so everyone can see that you requested that.
Yeah, which is that's also part of
And
it. I made a mistake. He didn't just compare it to a camera. He also compared it to Photoshop. So his example was that you can Photoshop the image. I feel wary saying this on the internet. You can Photoshop an image of a dressed woman onto the body of an undressed woman, right? But in that case, you're not creating the image of the undressed woman in the way that you are with the generative AI tool that is like creating its idea of what that woman looks like undressed. So I feel like it is fundamentally very different in that you are like creating illicit material that did not exist rather than altering prior existing illicit material.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people would also say these models, what they're doing is that they're reproducing the average of what we think an undressed woman would look like at the limit. And so this person doesn't really exist. It's like the average sort of image that you would get from a fictional person that looked like basically the averaged out version of all these people that we've trained on. But this person doesn't exist. I think that that's a bad faith argument, though, obviously.
Because like it was actually trained on real people.
Well, in part, I would say it's a bad faith argument because it's not really creating this average image of a naked woman based on all of these naked images. It's looking at the image that you give it and making the leap of going, well, it's got to be the same skin tone and it's got to be a physique that makes sense with that face. So it's more going off of the source material.
Well, it's basically creating the conditional average picture based off of the context you've provided it. So conditional on the context you gave it. So if the context is a woman who is 24 years old, grew up in this town in Michigan, blue hair, blah, 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 right? It'll create the average of that, but maybe there's only one person like that or two people like that, right? So at that point, you're not averaging over 1 million people. Like you're just reproducing this picture of a person that they saw on the internet, right? So a lot of people would say that this is like a data problem and that we have to just regulate the data better. It's so tough though. It feels like a lot of what these companies do, their edge is in getting access to like illicit data and being able to train their models on just this bad, like this data that we don't want to exist, but does nonetheless exist in the world. And that gives them their edge in being able to generate, photorealistic images, right?
Yeah. And I think there's a huge difference in the edgy humor that Elon Musk would like to protect and propagate. We all want free speech. But edgy humor largely circulates around hypotheticals.
Yeah.
And it's a hugely different thing. Those children who are actors in Stranger Things, they're going to have to live in a world where people have propagated those images of them, those fake images of them. It's no longer hypotheticals, it's targeted.
Right. Yeah. It's such a mess. I mean, what you would love to do at some point is almost like you were saying, Pierce, with the case of the printer. And this is what I was saying also within the case of iRobot. Like, it would be really cool to have something that's built into the model itself that at the level of the weights can detect when something illicit is being generated and just stop, like short circuit the process. But as far as I'm aware, that doesn't really exist. Like that technology just like, there's very little interest, I think, in generating that sort of technology in particular.
Yeah. Most of them are post facto as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Like it's easier to train a secondary model that tries to do this detection, which is how most of these safety classifiers end up working. And this is true for both text and images. It's like it'll actually generate you the image that you asked for initially, and then have some secondary screening process that says, is this image actually in alignment with, this list of value systems? And then that's a separate trained model to do it. So like in some cases, it actually is still generating behind the scenes because the model itself is like super unopinionated about what it's willing to generate and what it's not. And then there's just like this filtering pass that says, am I actually going to present this to the user? Is this actually something that's legit? Yeah, it's I think it's just like a technically hard problem, dog, which is probably why we don't have a built-in like internal model solution for it
Yeah.
thus far. I think for things like this, my attitude is honestly, let's try to do both on some level. Let's try to make models that are a little bit more opinionated in these ways to like not generate these things versus others. But I think that there's also the element of just, if I were to publish some of these things on Instagram or Facebook, I feel like my account would be banned. Maybe
Right.
maybe the world's moving in a different direction now, or we're such free speech absolutists. But like my sense is, if I took a naked photo of a real human being and then posted that, regardless of whether or not they consented to that, they'd be like, oh, well, that's obvious. You can't post that on Instagram.
Yeah.
That would be insane. And yet we've maybe normalized or become desensitized because people are hiding under this guise of, oh, but it's AI generated. It's not real. And I almost wonder if that's like less of a modeling problem and almost more of a social problem of we just treat these things differently, and I don't really know why.
The classification isn't clear of, do we treat this like we treat a photograph, or do we treat this like we treat an animation, where there's a lot more wiggle room with the more culturally.
Yeah. Is this like art or is this something real? Right. Because a lot of people would say, oh, no, this is just like an artistic image of a naked woman that I generated. This is my art that I generated,
Here's my hobby.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. But just popping back one stack, I think this actually dovetails nicely with another question I had for you, which is the fact that, you're a scientist, like you studied material science in undergrad, you have a master's in material scientist, but you're also an author. So when you're writing books, to what extent do you think your scientific training inspires you? And then similarly, do you think that you need to understand the source technology when you're writing about like a certain piece of technology? Do you have to be an expert in this thing in order to be able to write about it?
Well, I would say first and foremost that I have never called myself an author because I am still unpublished, but I like working on stories that I hope become published. I think it influences me
I think
more
you're
so-
also selling yourself a little short.
I think you're selling yourself way too short, by the way.
I have a blog and we are not on the same level.
overpromise, never over deliver instead of overpromise. That's my motto.
We'll have you on once you publish your book, and then you can do like a book tour as well.
I just sent
I
Rick
like that.
one of my
We can hold it up for the camera and say, so Bella Cooper Brown is joining us with, does it have a title yet? Or is it still a working title?
It does, but I think it might be changed.
Okay.
Rich has a copy now.
I have a
so
copy.
He can let us know. He just got it an hour ago. He had me airdrop it to him. He put a gun to my head, and I had
put a gun to her
choice.
side. Airdrop it
God,
now.
the perks
Yeah.
of recording in person. All right, for that on me. I wanna
Sucks to
take a
suck,
lead.
buddy.
He got the
Yeah.
gun from Palantir. I was so scared. I didn't know what to do.
Hey, but they're the good guys, right? Because they're inspired by. Lord
I
of the
wasn't
Rings, so.
scared. I felt like it's part of the mission.
felt
That's right.
part of
You
the-
felt safe, actually. That's why you gave it to
I
him,
felt-
because you
I
felt
felt
so
held.
safe,
I felt safe
Exactly.
and held.
naturally.
Training in science also means spending a lot of time around scientists. And I think possibly the more valuable thing is that it helps me create a more realistic model of what a character involved in science would be like. And they're not flatly evil people who sit around designing like the worst possible ideas to harm humanity. And there are a huge number of reasons why like some of the people who I know who trained in material science, they set out to become valuable and to use skills that they find engaging, and they found themselves at defense companies that they didn't imagine themselves working at because those were the opportunities available to them in the UK grad economy.
Which it sounds like it's bad right now. I mean, it's a quick segue away from what you were asking about, Richard. But is that a fair assessment that like it's kind of tough out there to find a job as a material scientist?
It is a fair assessment that there are a high number of applications per role, and I would say that the minimum experience and education is rising for each role. Where I don't know how much American scientists know, but it's pretty normal for a grad role with PhD preferred in the UK to start at about £27,000.
Which is like 40,000 American freedom dollars.
As far as I'm aware, you can make more than that as a waitress in California.
I
So
think
maybe
so.
I'll give you that.
I think the minimum wage is what, like 35K a year in the US or something like that? 25 maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, it depends a ton on the city versus like
Yeah,
federal,
in
but
San Francisco.
Yeah, that's brutal.
Yeah. So if anyone listening to this wants a computational material science trained in DFT, high performance computing, scientific computing, quantum espresso, and cast up, let me know.
That all sounds very impressive. Does that mean that every character that you're writing who's a scientist is getting underpaid for how much knowledge they have?
I think it's more that I just have a patience for these characters and why they might do these twisted things. You have to love a character to want to spend a year with them. And there's a book that I've finished, and that was an idea that I had at 17 and then put on ice for 17, 19, put on ice for a few years and then wrote multiple drafts. You're spending so long with these characters and in these worlds, and you're getting rounds of feedback either through like workshop groups or editors or all that kind of thing. If I didn't really, really care and feel like these were real people that I'm getting to dive in and interact with, I would have lost my mind, I think, because I mean, it's part of why you have to write in a genre that interests you as well. Like personally, I like reading rom-coms. I don't think I want to write a rom-com because I'm just not obsessed with them. And if I had to write the 5th draft of a rom-com,
Yeah, that'd be tough.
yeah.
So it sounds like when you're writing, like it's really not so much where you're saying, okay, I want to write a book about material science in any way. It's really more just like this. You almost see it as like separate. Is that is almost fair to say? Like, you know, your scientific training has maybe trained you to be very observant, very like methodical, and that maybe that inspires your writing process, but it's not really like the science behind it that you incorporate so much into the writing.
I feel like we should ask my supervisor if these things are true. Just wrote me a recommendation. So hopefully he said that my scientific training made me methodical and all of these very nice things. But I wanted to write books since I was 5 and
Makes
since
sense.
before I decided to go into
Yeah.
material science. And it's more that I get to meet interesting people through this path, and that sparks ideas of character types, that kind of thing. Like I said before, with this parallel between sci-fi authors and scientists, you have this archetype of someone who is going all in on their skill and maybe came from a background that was completely unrelated. And this is their ticket out, and also an avenue for their obsession. And that's a very interesting character. What is the kind of person who will go without money or fame or popularity or whatever it is that they have to sacrifice? Not that this is every scientist, but someone where those are not their main priorities, what are they going to be obsessed with? And that's an interesting start for a story.
Yeah. I mean, I also do want to say though, I feel like, I mean, I haven't read your books yet, but I think it is telling that from what you tell me, it sounds like you're really interested in studying not dystopian futures, not really like utopian futures, but somewhere like in between, right? Like the messiness that is in between. And I don't know, to me it feels like that's very scientific almost, because in science, like it's hard to like create something that's perfect, right? There is no such thing as something that's perfectly bad either. Typically, like even some like bad chemicals will have some positive things or positive applications, right? Like everything lives in this gray area in science. I don't know. Do you think that's fair? Do you think like in maybe in that way your scientific training has made you a little bit more lean towards studying like the realities that are sort of like attainable, but could also be a little dystopian in some sense if not used correctly?
Hmm. I should note that the first book I wrote, the one that's finished, is not speculative fiction. And so for me, I'm more interested in finding an interesting story where I treat things realistically. And so when I write the story I'm working on now, that's science fiction, I try and veer away from extremes because at those extremes, there isn't room for characters to be real people
Right.
because no one's realistic if they're in the face of evil or perfection. You can't really be corrupted by that. There isn't this interesting like descent or ascent for characters to go through that intrigues me. I don't know if it's a science thing, Maybe it's just that I'm very interested in people. I think people are really interesting. And I feel most like I'm interacting with people when I'm writing that gray moral area where I have a
Right.
lot of empathy for them. I have empathy for people who make these terrible decisions or who put their life on ice for 10 years and watch it skate by them. And this
Yeah.
is an interesting way for me to get to that.
Yeah. Interesting. I mean, like, do you think the reverse is at all true? Do you think like your writing has made you a better scientist in any way to flip the script a little bit?
I think so, but I think it's because it's given me a real gratitude for what is tangible
Okay.
and for where I can reach out for people who are better than me. And there are many material scientists who are just better than me. And it's a real gift that I've had the opportunity. I had a great supervisor for my master's, and I was able to gain a lot from his expertise. And I think when you spend a lot of time in an imaginary world, but also the feedback from people who read chapters, sometimes people don't take constructive criticism well. And so learn from that. And the criticism that they'll give you is too soft and it's too sycophantic. Sometimes people just go, this does not vibe with me. I hate it. It's terrible. It's so subjective that it's very nice to spend time somewhere where I go, I may not be the best at coding, but the Python script ran and I
Yeah.
got the simulation data. It's there. It happened. Could someone else have done it better? For sure. But I did it. So
I think you're selling yourself short. I think the script runs pretty well.
I want to double click on the question of this dystopian versus utopian world, because I actually think that seems to be a truism in science fiction where it's one or the other. I feel like you very rarely come across a book that tries to probe at this nuance in the middle. Why do you think that is? Is that just because people actually want to take it as a given in the book that yes, okay, I got this advice once of you can basically have a couple of primitives that your readers will accept without question when you write a book. But aside from that, things have to be logically coherent. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? You can't be changing everything so that's diametrically different. Otherwise, you're just going to have to spend too much time world building, and then people kind of lose faith in what you're doing. So is it a question of just like you want to have the extremes so that we like are really grounding the reader in something that they know? Or is it a little bit more nuanced of authors are really trying to probe at this extreme and then push the things under the rug in the messy middle because those are not the interesting questions? Whereas like in the day-to-day life, the thing that Richard and I certainly spend the most time grappling with is probably in the messy middle, right? It's like these things could be good or bad, but like how do we make them more good than bad? And what are the nuanced questions in the middle that I feel like sci-fi doesn't enjoy engaging with as much, maybe? And I'm like curious if you think that that's true, and if so, why?
Well, one of the things would be that if you go to an extreme, you have an immediate injection of drama, plot, suspense, and the plot is easier to structure around a terrible, evil thing that you
Yeah.
fight. You know what the end goal is when you're writing the first act, and the second act, and the third act. So that's very clear. Whereas you have to work harder, in my opinion, to structure an engaging plot that doesn't have such an obvious like boogeyman to target or holy grail to target. I also think a lot of it is that the majority of speculative fiction that's published, I believe, is more commercial, where those plots are encouraged, and that's what people want. They really like that when they pick up, for example, they really like that when they pick up a Stephen King book, which is not speculative fiction, that they know the tone and the pace. They can tell how a book is marketed, what the product is. And it's harder to do that if you're operating in that gray space, which is why you tend to find that it's more literary fiction authors who decide to try their hand at fiction who are playing around in that messy gray area. I'm sure there are commercial authors who've explored that mid ground, but like you said, that's why there's a skew towards utopia or dystopia. But an example of a messy middle ground explorer would be Kazuo Ishiguro, who wrote recently Klara and the Sun. That was out 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, something like that. And it's from the perspective of this artificial friend, this AF, who is placed with a family and engages with the family And what does it mean for Klara to love? And it's also in this world where people's professions are being phased out, and you imagine it's implied because we're in this future with AGI, basically, although it's not named that. And you have this interplay between the characters as they have to decide their hard limits of what's our purpose now? How should we morally deal with something that's artificial? Does it matter if we're mean to it? Does it matter if we put it in a junkyard?
I mean, my mom always is very polite to ChatGPT, so I think
Just in
I think-
case. Just in case.
I think when the robots take over, she'll be okay, but not so much for me, I don't think.
Have you been mean to chat?
I can be a little condescending. I will say that much. But I will say chat sometimes is really dumb and kind of deserves it. It has to learn from its mistakes, you know. I've also heard this argument. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on it, which is that if we write a lot of dystopian fiction and we train models on dystopian fiction, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy where we're going to end up in a dystopian world. Do you think there's any truth to that? If we focus too much on dystopia or things that are, not what we want, that in effect, if you're just generating a lot of bad data like that, the models will somehow learn that that is something that they could also, like, that's a possible policy that they could follow, right? Like, it's like some people will talk about how there's a future in which robots will learn to hack their models to basically take over the computers and kill all humans because that's actually beneficial as like from a utilitarian perspective for the whole world. And
Bro,
and
why'd you just put that on the record?
and other people will say, yeah, people will say like, don't say that because otherwise the models will actually learn on your data and that will be a self-fulfilling prophecy where now that data exists in the world, like that is something that could happen. I mean, obviously I think that's a dumb argument, but do you think there's anything to be said about if we focus too much on dystopia, like it's almost a self-fulfilling thing to a certain extent?
I think it's more about the visions of people behind the development of AI, where if all that they're ingesting as possible visions for where they could be headed is something where the best case scenario is that they win in dominating whatever field,
Yeah.
that's not ideal. But I don't think it's a case of, I don't think that Claude is going to read a dystopia. I don't think Claude is going to read June and just believe that it's the least Nagaib and bomb deserts. I don't think that's a probable outcome or a possible outcome. But I would like to see more imagination in the space of the people who are shaping this future. Before things like we said, Anthropic have come up with this idea of constitutional AI. What are they imagining that constitution? How are they imagining it be implemented? I'd love more imagination in that space, and I'd love it for it to be a bit more public so that we could all discuss and form our ideas. Like we've just said, like one of them should be around what kind of images can be generated. Are they only filtered out after they've been generated? That kind of thing.
I know that Apple for a while had an in-house philosopher or like a philosopher in residence. But to a certain extent, like I think Facebook has it too a little bit when they were trying to design like the rules of policy and stuff like this, what kind of things they want to allow on the platform. Claude has it to a certain extent, OpenAI has it to a certain extent, but it would be really cool if a resident philosopher becomes like a thing that every company has, you know? Everyone has a CTO, CFO, head of product, and a resident philosopher.
Head of
philosophy. Well, and the Apple one actually was Joshua Cohen, who used to be at Stanford and was a political science professor, which I also think was a political philosophy professor, which I think is also kind of interesting. If it's not like straight philosophy, it's like political philosophy, which also has a tilt to it. I guess maybe it's like how things interact with the larger society is kind of like the domain of politics and therefore the domain of technology.
Yeah, I think where I retain skepticism is just that if your salary is being paid by a company, that's a huge bias for deciding that maybe, or if you own shares in that company, maybe you feel that the philosophically best thing for that company to do also happens to be the path where that company is.
No, that's crazy. What? Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it is so hard. And obviously, we want to have great people in government ideally making these decisions, but I think in the US at least, it's hard to get really like very technical and philosophical people working for the government. It seems like in some sense we let companies regulate themselves because that's where all, the folks are. And it's really hard to hire, I think, it's in the US at least, for very technical, very savvy folks who are willing to take a 5x pay cut and move to Washington, D.C., right? I know that we have a friend who works in government and he's always talking about this. He's sad about the fact that it's really hard to get folks from the Bay Area to move to DC and do the hard policy work. Because I think there's just a culture of not really valuing that, you know? And maybe that's what it'll take, like a big rebrand somehow, or just DC paying like competitive Bay Area salaries. I don't know.
Maybe. Do you think that it's in part because of the employment structure that's available where people feel like they can't dive into like there seems to be a lot of project-based work in SF for tech people. Not everyone is hired with a 9 to 5. A lot of them come in and they do contract work or they are just involved with a specific startup as like the consultation person. Maybe that could be an option for policy where people can be.
Yeah, something like that too, like a part-time thing. Yeah, potentially. Who knows? I mean,
that's kind of the whole Code Save America initiative, right? Or
is that the Pod Save America guys?
Code for America. It was
Code
like
for
that
America,
government
right.
initiative. Yeah, that was in the Office of Digital Services. I think they've subsequently renamed to just be Doge.
Right.
But I mean, in theory, that's like a decent structure where every 2 years you'll basically be put on a rotation, kind of like Teach for America, except it's software engineers that are doing it. They'll come on board 2 years, become entrenched with some agency, help them out. But I do think the con of that is so much of what engineers do in a new company is you've got to get used to the code base. AI makes that a little bit easier, but you have to get used to the customs, the code base, the people to really start to solve problems. And I feel like by the time you're 1 year into it, you finally found your footing. You only have 1 year left to be productive before things shuffle over. Like you need to learn the knowledge, like the institutional know-how to actually be able to be productive and get your job done. And like a 2-year rotating term, I think is nice. It's better than nothing. But I do feel like, yeah, until you equalize salaries and maybe give people, honestly, maybe we should rename some of these government departments after some of these sci-fi concepts because I think they need a little bit more of an internal morale boost of people feeling like they're making a difference versus just paper pushing. I think that's a decent part of it too.
I like it. Maybe we just call like the Department of Defense like the Darth Vader department
Great.
of the Dark Force. Yeah, exactly.
I think a part of it would be that people in tech are often people who go, I just want to work really hard on the problems. I want to be engineering full time. I'm not super interested in glad handing. And obviously, there are politics on the boards of these companies that the companies have to engage with, but they like hiring people who are going to just grind away on these crazy work hours. And I don't think that's such an option for politics to go in and be like, no. Don't let me deal with the people.
Mhm.
I don't want to have to explain this to other people who aren't au fait with the terminology. I just want to make it work. That doesn't need to be an option.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. It's really, really hard. I think in the 60s, like working at the government was seen as like something that was like, if you were like working as like I don't know, at like an embassy or something like that, right? That was seen as, oh, like how great, our son is like stationed at the US Embassy in Mexico, like approving visas, right? That was seen as, okay, yeah, it's on the same level as being like a doctor or a lawyer, And now that philosophy or that sense of working in the public sector, working in government as something that's like ethical and virtuous and like good for society, like I think we've lost that too. Like that's a big part of it, unfortunately. Okay, wait, but Bill, I wanted to ask you, now that we're talking about salaries and government and sort of like policy stuff, here's a hypothetical for you that maybe might not be so hypothetical at some point in the future. If Anthropic came to you and said, hey, Bella, we heard you published a new fancy book. We would love to be able to get that as data that we feed into our model. Is that okay? Can we use that? Do you want a royalty? Are we allowed to have some of the IP? Have you given this any thought? I mean, I feel like that is going to be a question that you're going to have to face in a
You
couple
think
years.
it's a question that Anthropic are going to be buying up my books?
Indirectly, yeah, I think so.
They already did, right? Like that $1 billion lawsuit settlement of the class action of them trading on the pile, right? I think they ended up paying out maybe $5,000 per book that they were using.
I don't think I'd love it because I think that for me, the role of books is that it's part of a cultural dialogue. It's an artifact that you leave for what humans were thinking. I have not a huge problem with LMs being trained to generate narrative. I just think it's a fundamentally different thing. And I think we've seen that with AI art, for instance, where any art gallery that I pass stocking human art because The art is less so about the ability to
I hate that we
that
have to
end product.
differentiate now. Human art.
Well, it becomes
We
that
do. No, you're
fundamental
right.
question.
It's just I hate it.
It becomes a fundamental question of like, why were you interested in that painting? Was it literally just the composition of materials in that exact way? In which case, why do you care if something is faked?
Yeah.
Or is it part of that narrative of I like that a human is speaking to me and impacting the culture and leaving that footprint in this way? And I think that's what books do. It's part of why that I just don't think that talent is the bottleneck for any arts industry at the moment. And it's more about reach and who you give audiences to and put marketing campaigns behind and that kind of thing. So
So you would turn down the deal if Anthropic gave you $5,000.
$5,000.
Yeah, and they have access to your book, right? I mean, it's still your book. It's like you're the author, obviously, but they
And they
just get
want
to
to
train on
train.
it.
I mean, my question would be, what are you gonna do with this? Why? Why is this interesting to you? Are you trying to create cultural artifacts like novels? Are you trying to pretend that those novels are made
I
by
think it's
people?
literally just so that OpenAI can't have it. I think it's like we just want stuff that the others don't have, and I think that there's a lot of value in that. I think that's it. The more data, the better, you know. And if you have 240 pages of text that you wrote for your book, hey, that's 240 pages that OpenAI doesn't have, or Gemini
I
doesn't
guess
have.
maybe that's some of the difficulty, though. Theoretically, right? It's like you don't really know what these things are going to be used for because
Yeah.
it's being pumped into such a generic appliance. I almost think people would be more opinionated about that question if you were like, this is only going to be used to write other novels. Then I imagine most authors would be like, well, no, I'm a novelist. Why would I give you the ability to put me out of a job? But because it's, oh, well, you know, we just want this for a chatbot and people can use the chatbot however they please. It's almost like the generic escape hatch. It's up to the users versus it's up to us.
I think there's so much value in a book being shared is a huge part of it that if you had, I may be wrong, but if you had a button to press that just generates a custom novel for you, it's not that interesting because it's not the same novel as was pushed in the book club that you follow online or that your friends were reading or that your dad read or something like that. It's not going to be a cultural artifact in the same way if it's that individual.
Are you worried that chat's going to take away your job?
No, I'm not. Maybe I should be, but I want to write books that people want to read. And I think that's a part of it is that if no one wants to read books anymore because they find it easier to digest ChatGPT novels, that would be the sad. Not about me personally not selling copies.
I mean, I feel like the big concern is like people don't want to read books because they want to scroll TikTok. I feel like that's kind of the dichotomy, you know?
I think with books are somewhat protected because its fans are snobby enough to care about the origins. And yes, maybe chat could generate it, but they would just really care about the fact that it did. I mean, one of the things is that like people care about the experience that an author has had based on the topics that they're writing about. If I write a character about the mixed heritage experience growing up in London, I think that people accept that better coming from me than if you write it. And so what can AI give us in the literary fiction space? Because I don't think people want to hear its take on living life as a woman or as an immigrant or as someone who's really experienced life. So then you're going for the absolute edge cases of the most rote topics. But we already have so many people who write that stuff for free. The self-publishing field is alive and well, and people put these things online, and they tend to pay for more specialist books, I guess. Specialist not in terms of nonfiction, but just in terms of what are the experiences that you're writing about.
100%. I mean, I feel like books to me feel very protected from chat because when I'm picking up a book, the trade that I'm making here is I could be consuming any other form of media, but I want something that's like human generated, you know? Whereas when I'm watching a video, and this has happened to me before, where there'll be some informational thing, I realize it's chat generated, but I'm like, all right, whatever. I'm just here to like get the information. Like, I don't really care that it's chat generated.
It's an information, not an experience.
It's an
being referred to.
information, yeah, exactly. But with books, especially like the types of books you write, it's like, no, I want to know what you have to say, right? Like this is like the human experience that I want. And so it would feel crazy to just read like a chat GPT generated book to me. I don't know. Or it just feels like a waste of my time. Like,
I would say my huge caveat is that I was very surprised by the rise of AI therapist chatbots because I had previously thought that the highest perceived value of therapy was that you have another person's take on your problems, on your experiences. And it's interesting to me that actually a lot of people don't care about that at all. They might prefer it because maybe in a sense there's more privacy, that they don't have to tell a real person about their problems and they just want a rote list of solutions or a sounding board. So I may be completely wrong. And maybe we won't have new authors in 10 years.
no, that's great. I mean, some people also have their ChatGPT boyfriends and girlfriends. Did you see this whole like New York Times piece about this? They had a lot of coverage on this where a lot of people reported just like falling in love with like ChatGPT.
Oh, AI psychosis?
Yeah. Or like they just felt like these things were just like they were aware that it's AI, but it's like actively really nice to you. It's very helpful. And I think the American Association of like Psychiatrists actually came out and said, hey, this is like kind of okay with us. We don't think that this is a problem. Like we see this as net neutral or beneficial, but we don't see this as actively negative. And to me, that was a little surprising because my gut reaction, my prior is like, this is bad, right? Like anything that's not human to human interaction is certainly not good. Yeah, so you're right. I'm surprised that we don't see more pushback towards, to AI therapists, AI boyfriend, girlfriends, AI friends,
I like how
Um,
you pointed at me as if I was the AI boyfriend girl.
AI friends.
I'm real.
You're real. Okay. Oh, sorry. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's the question of AI friends to me. It's what is the alternative for people, I guess? Because I think these things are fine if they are purely augmented of the daily experience. So if you have a group of friends and you also talk to AI, then I think that that's fine. Or if you don't have any friends and you, for whatever reason, can't get friends, you're forward deployed on some oil rig, then great, that's filling a void that you otherwise cannot fill organically. Or I imagine if you're in a part of the country that maybe is a little bit more conservative and you've never really felt in, like there are a host of settings in which I think these could actually be very helpful. I think I get concerned with any kind of technology if it's taking away from the human experience. If people start going to chatbots as their first place to turn to instead of real life friends or instead of trying to make real life friends because it's just easier and you never have to go through the awkwardness of trying to make friends, trying to make them laugh, trying to suss out the vibes. And yeah, I don't know. I don't think that's anything new. It's kind of like why people are on their phones scrolling in waiting rooms instead of trying to talk to other people or looking at magazines. I think it's just like the easiest thing to do. And that has been true pre-AI, but is that I wonder, I guess maybe the lane point is I wonder if some of these takes kind of lack some nuance of they can be good, but they also can be bad. And it depends a little bit on how you're actually using it in the first place.
Yeah. Mhm. My concern is that it would supplant these aspects of the human experience. The analogy that comes to mind is that I think there has been an uptick in critical thinking around pornography and that it can really supplant the way that people go about seeking intimacy. And part of what makes it so addictive for certain people is that it's like a frictionless experience. There's no access barrier, and you don't have to deal with this dialogue of consent, of just emotional intimacy, anything like that. There's no barrier like that. And that reminds me of what AI relationships could be in the worst possible sense, but there's no barrier and you don't have to really earn the positive feedback by being a decent person or by listening or by having any kind of humility. And those are experiences that I feel like should be beaten into us by our social experiences. Maybe the individual experience feels nice, but if the feedback model that it gives to people is that you can have these completely one-sided, emotionally intimate or pseudo-emotionally intimate experiences where there is no incentive for you to look deep into what you can offer that other person emotionally or what your flaws are, that seems to me to be a bad thing.
Do you remember when these like when World of Warcraft and these like MMORPG games were coming out in like 2000? I never really played them that much, but I know a
You're
lot of
more of a
like
RuneScape guy.
yeah, exactly. I was more of a Club Penguin guy myself. I'm a Club Penguin man. I fashioned myself to be a Club Penguin man. No, but I remember people having a similar conversation where it was like, well, if we're just talking to our friends online and we're like meeting strangers and we're like, our little characters are like these penguins walking around and we get to like bump into people and that's how we interact with people, that can't be good. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if there's been studies, but it doesn't seem like our generation, maybe our generation's like really bad at talking to each other, but it feels compared to the boomers or, Gen X, it doesn't seem like it's that different. And in some sense, I think you learn a certain set of like norms and policies that you adopt when you are in this like different setting, right? Like when you're on RuneScape or World of Warcraft or Club Penguin, like you would have certain set of like social norms that were different than the social norms in the real world. And maybe that's also the case when we're interacting with chat and in the future when we're interacting with our home robots. We just don't know what those social norms are yet. It's gonna be real interesting to figure that out. And here's the meta point is that we align these models to human preferences by seeing their interaction with humans, and then humans decide when they've liked the interaction. And so it's this meta thing where it's like we interact with these things and we build the social norm with them, but these things have been built to appease us or seem like nice models to us because that's how we designed them in the first place. So it's a really confusing interaction there. I don't really know how to think about what it means to have a social norm with something that you created for yourself.
There is also an inbuilt social friction to these online games in that if you're really annoying or untalented, you're not gonna have as much of a fun time playing World of Warcraft or COD, right? And people are gonna call you names in the chat. There's no button that you can press where you're just like, everyone thinks I'm the best in the way that they could be with AI.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
amazing and I make everyone laugh all the time. And you can do that with an AI.
That's true. That's true. This reminds me, I had a RuneScape girlfriend who stole like a million of my like RuneScape gold coins, and then I gave up. I just hated the game afterwards. My friend Jan also helped me, and he lost the password, so then it was game over. That's the story
It
of
was
how
really game over. Are you
that's
sure
game
there wasn't
over.
anything happening with Jan and your RuneScape girlfriend? Are you sure that was
Did
it
you ever
maybe?
see
It
them
might
in
have
the
actually
same
been his
room?
RuneScape girlfriend. I don't really remember the details. I just remember we lost a lot of money somehow, and then he lost our password. Come to think of it, actually, it might have been him this whole time. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay, I wanna end the pod on this, Bella. So you are a scientist, you're an author, but now you also want to get into AI research, you want to get more into AI broadly. And we've had some conversations and you've asked me, how do I pivot from material science, my interest in literature to AI? Like what are these building blocks? Should I go get a PhD? Should I go work at a company and then maybe like work myself into a data science or ML role? What should I do? And I've given you a little bit of advice. But to summarize for you, Piers, my TLDR is in 2026, if you want to get into ML AI, forget the boot camps. I think you just got to study like stats, linear algebra, some of the basics, understand what these models are. Don't think of them as these like magical things. Understand the fundamentals and then everything else just kind of comes naturally. That is my hot take. And I think I might get some pushback on this, but frankly, like things change all the time. It's impossible to keep up. The one thing that never changes is math. Math is always the same. And it's been the same for millennia, right? And sure, like we have new tools, but fundamentally, if you know what you're doing in terms of statistics, mathematics, how to model things broadly, whether you're modeling a self-driving car or text, or you're working at Neuralink modeling brain activation, you're just doing the same sorts of like statistical regressions. And then once you've understood that, the coding itself is pretty trivial with agents, right? And with coding tools. I think that that's kind of how you have to approach, getting into AI these days. I don't know. What do you think, Pierce? What kind of advice would you give Bella?
I should caveat by saying that my interest is not so much pivoting away from material science to AI, is that I did my research using DFT, and I'm not sure what the field will look like for people who do DFT-based research in 5 years' time. There is a big shift in investment to using AI to do computational material science research. So my goal is more so to stay somewhat more flexible, to continue doing what I really am passionate about, which is solar cell material science research as opposed to join meta.
Yeah. That's a good caveat.
Train the next version of llama. Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say in general, and that clarifies my question. It's like you might not need to choose a modality, but I feel like picking a modality for yourself is useful in a sense. It's like Rich and I have kind of always been language modeling guys. Computer vision has always been of interest, but for whatever reason just didn't click as much. And it's funny because the actual tools of the trade end up being the same thing. Like in large part, we're using the same models for all of the different modalities. So like the math remains the same. I feel like it just kind of hones the focus area of the exploration, the pursuit a little bit to like know what modality. But in the case of material science, I'd be like, okay, physics simulations is like absolutely in there. There's probably some correlates that you could find to bio research where they've spent a lot of time investing in computational dynamics where we have models that are trying to simulate physical properties and that ends up being useful, where maybe there actually is a closed form solution for some of these physical phenomenon, but having a model that's just able to do that like at speed and at scale to be able to kick off infinite experiments ends up being super practical. So I think Rich's take to get like very good at the math is absolutely one thing. And the only thing that I'd probably add to that is I think that the math that you do if you're just studying a stats textbook tends to be overly contrived and like doesn't really touch most of what we do day to day, which is actually spending time in the code implementing these solutions and like working around the minutia of floating point arithmetic, which is something that the stats textbooks never talk about. So in that sense, then I'd say like picking a couple of projects that maybe touch on the domain to like re-implement papers can be super viable. Even if the solution's already out there, it's, this is kind of the day-to-day of actually building these things from scratch, which I think at a deep mind is probably the majority of what they end up doing.
Yeah, I agree with that. But I would also say that if you look at some hot take papers from the last 10 years, oftentimes the hot take, if you look at it mathematically, is like the most lukewarm take ever that you could imagine, but was actually a big insight. So for instance, I did this little deep dive today. I was just curious about this. People these days like to use something called pre-layer normalization as opposed to post-layer normalization. It's a very minor detail that concerns like where in a neural network you put this like normalization layer. Okay. For all intents and purposes, really doesn't matter. A lot of people are just like, okay, pre-layer norm is what we do nowadays, so that's what I'm going to code up. And then maybe some people might have some intuition about, okay, well, we do this because it maybe helps like training stability, right? But if you look at the math and you just sketch it out, it doesn't take that hard. It like you take the derivatives and very quickly you see, oh, like post-layer normalization is just like wrong. There's no good way that gradients can flow through the network if you do this. And so my take is more like, if you have a strong statistical or mathematical background, you could just see these things, like it just comes to you like intuitively that, hey, this is like not the right solution. So this just has to be the thing that you do. And in the field of AI, we were using post-layer normalization for 3-4 years until someone was like, well, this math doesn't really check out. And then they wrote a paper, and then everyone since has just done this thing, right? And a lot of papers will be like that in the field of AI, where people will just converge onto one solution, keep doing it, don't question it, and then someone will be like, well, actually, maybe we should change this. Does this check out, guys? And then the field will be like, oh, well, no, that was wrong, actually. Let's do something else.
So there's like low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, there was like this optimizer that everyone used for years called Adam. Turns out that like they were doing some bad like statistical thing with the correlation between different parameters. And then someone said, okay, well, actually, we should just do this other thing. It's just like one change in the code, one little line. And then you have Adam W, and that's what everyone's using now. So my meta point is it's very useful to have a sense of like intuitively how these things, why we do certain things, how these things are built up. And then the actual coding of itself is in some sense not that hard, I think. Yeah. Unless you're doing fancy things like Pierce. Pierce is doing some of the fanciest stuff out there. So of course he's going to say that. You're going to be debugging floating point issues. But yeah, I mean,
it's so funny how colored by our backgrounds, I think any advice ends up being. I think the math thing is, and again, like Richard's more of the math guy. I think in another world he would have studied physics instead of CS. I think the math is like,
those guys are hardcore.
Maybe. You were too, buddy. I guess my counterpoint or counter argument to the math, as much as it exists, is there were so many unbelievably good mathematicians that missed that normalization thing, even though they had the math backgrounds. You know what I mean? It was not for lack of international Olympiad people that were
Sure.
studying CS and doing AI that we didn't really get the like post pre-normalization thing. So I don't know. I think it's like it's a prereq to have good math, but I almost don't want people thinking that having to be a number one mathematician in the world is a hard requirement to be doing AI stuff, because I actually think a lot more of it typically is like, are you willing to question assumptions? You know, the first person that questioned the whole like layer prenorm thing, yeah, they were probably good enough at math, but I imagine they also just said, okay, well, we've been doing this for a while. Is this actually justified on some basis? And then the
Right.
second thing I think is just like leaning into what makes you a unique individual that is not the math itself. Because I think like Steve talks a lot about this. He's like physicist at Stanford, where he says that, you know, in his PhD cohort, who are a bunch of physicists, they're all fantastic at math. Like that actually is a given in physics. It's like the people that end up publishing the most valuable papers are usually not the strongest mathematicians, but they're people who are just better at collaborating or expressing ideas or bouncing off of other people or just like reformulating things in a creative way. So I have no idea how you flex that muscle in the day to day, but if there are opportunities to flex a little bit of that, maybe just like doing some ad hoc projects instead of reading that additional book on stats theory, I feel like probably resounds to the benefit of becoming an AI researcher instead of, again, trying to out math the math guys and the math gals. I don't really think that that's a game that, you know, I think it's a hard game to play.
It's true. Math people are legit, dude. They're scary. But you are a math gal. I feel like, I mean, I look at a lot of, I don't know, your senior thesis, wasn't it like all math or something like that? Weren't you doing a lot of like equation solving for solar panel, blah, blah, blah?
Yeah, there was a lot of solar cell, blah, 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 and some math in that solar cell, blah, blah, blah. So DFT is a kind of software that's based on quantum mechanics equations, and then you set which versions of those equations you're going to use, because
Okay.
obviously you can't.
When you say DFT, I'm hearing discrete Fourier transform. Is that right?
Sorry, density functional theory.
Oh, okay. That's useful to know. Okay, cool.
Sorry, my bad. And you use that to model very small structures like silicon, 72 atoms of it in an interface with silica, and you put in one aluminium atom is what I was simulating. And so, yes, it's very useful to have a fundamental understanding of the maths involved, and we did have classes in that in undergrad. But then it does feel a little bit, you're trying to figure out where to set parameters. You're running a bunch of calculations, you're changing little features, you're talking to the people who wrote that software, and you're not like doing the equations by hand.
Right.
The software is doing it for you.
Okay, gotcha. But still, I mean, like, I think obviously you have a strong understanding of math. Like, I think you getting into AI would actually be very easy. I think broadly, I think there's less to it than people make out.
New podcast? Bella gets into AI the journey.
Bella gets into AI the journey. I mean, I would love to hear your journey as you like progress more and more.
New memoir.
Honestly, that could be your next book. Bella, going from material science to AI, a journey of self-discovering.
I think we'll work
Becoming-
on the title.
Becoming
We'll
robot.
workshop that.
Yeah. Well, incredible, Bella. Thank you so much for making time. We really super appreciate it. This is
Yeah,
incredible.
this was an amazing convo. Thanks so much for coming out to London.
Thank you for having me. This has been super fun, and I love talking to you guys anyway. So
And hopefully
That's
we'll
true.
see you in
That's
the Bay in the next 4 to 10 years. I don't know. Fingers crossed. Maybe we'll
Man
have
can
you on,
dream.
and we'll have you in the studio at Pierce's place.
I do love.
That's exactly right. Feast
That's
your
my
eyes.
main thing.
What's
I
that?
want to go to Cooper's and I want to get the veggie tofu wrap.
Oh my
It's
god.
so good.
Koopas.
And I think about it often. I've made my own version at home many times.
Have you gotten the chicken chipotle sandwich?
I've tried a bite of one.
It wasn't good.
It was good,
Okay.
but I'm about the veggie tofu crunch wrap.
Okay, fair enough. You know, Pierce actually got an industrial tub of the sauce that they use for the chicken chipotle sandwich.
It's true.
What
No lie.
means? Did you buy it or you acquired it?
I backhauled their importer to it's like some industrial food distributor, and I was like, yo, guys, I know this is not couth for you, but please just hook me up with the good. I had this sandwich every single Saturday and Sunday during senior year. bar none. I would always be ripping a chicken chipotle sandwich.
At like at 11 a.m., you would always see. I mean, honestly, all of us. Like there was like a group of 6 guys. We would all just every Saturday at 11 a.m. just somewhat exhausted and hungover. We would show up at the Koopa in Green at 11 a.m. and just get like 6 chicken chipotle sandwiches and just kind of eat them with our sunglasses on, just in silence. Yeah, in
exactly
silence.
right. You've
This
never
could be the
seen a
new-
bigger table. Yeah, it's a big table of CS people, and we're all just munching away in absolute silence. It was
It was
quite a sight.
incredible. It was the best time of my life. I love
But
it.
Nice
some of
that
my
you
best
guys are
memories,
social.
dude.
This could be the new pre-trained ritual. You guys can meet up
just
with
the chicken.
Koopas.
I
get your
think we
chicken
moved
chipotle
past it.
sandwiches.
Honestly, I think it's one
I'm
of these
sorry.
things where if you have it again in your early 30s, it just hits different than in your early 20s. You know.
Early 30s, that's tough. Sparing a thought
We
for men in
know.
their early 30s in podcasting.
I know.
Pour one out. I know I've become a meme. It was so
I've been
novel when we were 20. And
know.
now we're just doing what every other 30-year-old guy is.
It's tough.
More
All right,
so
well,
in LA though. I think San Francisco thankfully has not been inundated by the podcasters quite yet. But yeah, gosh, like you're going out to a cocktail party in Los Angeles and I ask people what they do and say, I have a podcast. And I say, you sponsored by the My Underwear guys too? Yeah. Uh-huh.
MeUndies.
Me
Yeah. Well, this podcast is sponsored by MeUndies. Actually, I've decided
Is it?
a free sponsorship. Yeah, because I need underwear. Actually, I need to get some
Oh,
underwear.
okay.
So if you guys want to send me some, I'd love that. On that happy note, thanks so much, Bella, and we'll hopefully see you very soon.
See you
Alrighty,
soon.
guys. Bye.
Bye, y'all.